Good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Richard O'Brien, Director of the John D. O'Brien African American Institute here. And um, just to let you know, the mayor is still coming, but she has been delayed. There's been an unfortunate situation in Dorchester that required her attention, and hopefully it will be settled down, at least for her to be able to get away and come. So, but we invite Mayor Kim Janey here, as a welcome home is what I will say to her when she comes. And the reason why it's a welcome home for her is because her dad is one of the original founders of the Institute, Cliff Janey. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was here in 1968, and he's one of the people that were listed in the founding documents that were turned over to President Asa Knowles at the time. And so when she comes, I will take the opportunity to not only welcome her home, but also greet her as the child of John O'Brien, right? And her being the child of Cliff Janey. That history has a way of coming together and closing a circle, and this certainly would be one of those opportunities. We've had a lot of famous people here and on campus, influential people here and on campus. And as I had mentioned to some folks, the mayor-elect, Michelle Wu, has actually been here at least 3 times. But there was something special about Mayor Kim Janey coming here tonight. And what is really special about it is those of us who grew up in this city know how much our city has gone through. And for her to be able to emerge and be in a position as mayor of this city, yes, it's an important symbol of the times that we are in, but it speaks so much more about how far our city has come. And I don't mean to suggest that we have it all figured out and that our city has healed and that we have resolved all the issues, but we're getting there. We're getting there. And those of us who lived through those very painful times of the 70s and even the 80s and portions of the 90s are breathing a little bit better these days as our city visibly begins to change. And so Mayor Janey coming here tonight is more than just a stop in her final days as mayor. But it's really important that we embrace her, and show her the love that she deserves for all that she has done and the sacrifice and pain that she has gone through in just these short 7 or 8 months. But that we appreciate her and what she has done. So the John D. O'Brien African American Institute, as I mentioned, has been here since 1968. And it was a group of students in 68 that came together after the assassination of Dr. King and a whole host of other things that were happening during that time. As a lot of campuses did, students came together to try and make a change at that time. And when the students came together back then, they had a vision of a place that would represent peace and tranquility for Black students during those difficult times. And it has evolved and emerged over time to become more than just a safe space, although it is still that too. And every time situations emerge, our students find this place as a place where they could come and feel comforted and feel safe and feel like they have people that they can trust to help them process whatever it is that they are going through. And when George Floyd was killed, we were all called on to do that once again. And so this place, or this space, has been here more than 50 years. Physically, a little bit offset when it was in the old building and now here in the new building. But it really is about the place that we create and the space that we create for our students as an ongoing place of support and an ongoing place of guidance, direction, development, all those things. And so I'm proud of our students. I'm proud of all of our colleagues that are here today. But I am super proud of my newest colleague, Professor Regine Jean-Charles. Yep. She is director of the Africana Studies Program, and there's a whole lot of other stuff attached to her title, but I won't go through all that. But the thing that I will say about Dr. Jean-Charles is, since she got here, if there was such thing as hitting the ground running, you know how you say that people hit the ground running, yeah, it's sort of metaphorical. She literally hit the ground running. She came in the door, was like, I just gotta meet you. Where's her first appointment? Where we going to speak? Where we going to meet, you know? And she signed on to things that she didn't have to sign on to. We're co-leading the Black Faculty and Staff Association. Her and I were guest panelists on the Open Classroom a couple of weeks ago. And those of us who are in these circles of faculty and faculty meetings and all that stuff, you'll see her. She's everywhere. And she hasn't, and she put out a book. But she hasn't stopped since she got here, and she fits right into this Northeastern environment, which I always call the fastest moving, slow place you ever want to be, because sometimes it feels like we're at a crawl and then the next minute it's moving at lightning speed. But she fits right in. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank Regine for her colleague and being a friend, and just letting her know that we're here to support her efforts and her vision for what the Africana Studies Program can be, but probably more importantly, what our Black presence on campus can mean. And so without further ado, I'd like to bring to the podium my colleague and my friend, Professor Regine Jean-Charles. Let's go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see you. I really need you all to start moving up when we do these events. We have a COVID protocol here at Northeastern. We all get tested every week. We're all vaccinated. We can sit next to each other. We can sit closer to each other. It's okay. Thank you so much, Richard, for that introduction. I'm really delighted to be here. I remember the first day that I came to Northeastern, so my appointment began on July 1st, and it was a summer day, and I walked kind of all around. My office is on Tremont Street in Renaissance Park. And I remember walking down Columbus Ave, and I saw these flags with all these faces of these students. And they were, I think I counted the number of students of color, of which they were predominantly students of color, right? So you could see these students, we had the students who were Asian, and South Asian, and Black, and brown. And it said Northeastern, and then it said underneath, Mayor Kim Janey. And I remember when I came into this office, when I came to the Institute for the first time, and I said to Richard, you know, we have to bring Kim Janey. And he was like, oh, that'll be easy because Northeastern is in her roots. And I knew, and this was back in the summer, right? And I knew that regardless of what happened with the election, that it was imperative that we bring Kim Janey here to campus. And that we thank her for her service, that we acknowledge, like Richard said, that she's part of this family, and that we also pick her brain, to be honest, right? Because for me, as someone that works at the intersection of race, gender, and justice, I am just so committed and so curious, right? I'm so committed to these causes, but also just so curious about her experience from an intersectional perspective, what it means to be the first Black woman mayor of Boston, what it means to be someone who grew up in the city of Boston and who's had some of the challenging experiences that she's shared about, right, in her childhood, and to occupy this position of the highest office in the city. So I was very excited at the prospect of bringing her here. And thankfully, we had so many people that were eager to partner with us in this endeavor, starting with the John D. O'Brien African American Institute. And we also have the Office of Civic and Community Engagement. We also have the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. We also have the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs. Forgive me, I'm new, so sometimes I can't remember all of the Northeastern letters and things. But we had so many people there was just this groundswell, you know, where people said, of course, we would like to sign on to this. The Dukakis Center, it goes on and on. So it's very exciting for us to be able to have this event, and especially as we know that the term is about to come to an end. And so as Richard said, the mayor is unfortunately delayed due to an emergency in Boston. And you know, I know for me, I'm keeping the people that were shot in Dorchester. There were 2 police officers that were shot, and it was a hostage situation. I'm keeping those people in prayer. And we hope that she can come to us, but we understand that this is part of the profession, right? So we're going to adapt. We're Northeastern, right? Everyone kept telling me before I got here, Northeastern is nimble and agile. So we are going to be nimble and agile, and we are going to work with it until she gets here. So what we have planned are 2 things. So originally, the plan was for the mayor to come and speak, and then we were going to have a short, you know, time of questions where I would be in conversation with her. But then we wanted to open it up for a community forum where we could discuss a number of themes that are important to us as we think about this turning point in our city's history. I have to say also for me, this is very exciting. You know, when I was walking on Columbus Ave and looking at those flags, I felt very excited to be on an urban campus. Throughout my career, you know, I did my PhD at Harvard, I did my undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania, which I loved being in Philly. But since then, you know, I hadn't really been in a city. I did a postdoc at UVA, and then I taught at Boston College for 12 years. But to be in a city, to me, is so important. And we have an important charge as a university that is in a city, particularly for me in the field of Africana Studies and as a Black feminist scholar, where we know we don't believe in the binary between theory and praxis, right? We know that whatever we are studying in our classrooms, when we're studying Black history, when we're studying Black literature, when we're studying political science, that there has to be an applicable part of it, right? The praxis is important. And of course, at Northeastern, this is why we talk about experiential learning too, right? So I think it really behooves us as a university community to think about what does it mean for us at this juncture, in this moment, in this particular moment, when we're talking about racial injustice, right? When we're talking about gender equity, when we're saying Black Lives Matter, when we're aware about AAPI hate, we're at a very important moment in our justice movements. And it's exciting that we have, you know, as my friend over there, I forgot his name now, was saying, we have an incoming mayor who's so aware of these organizing principles, right, that are things that we have been talking about in the freedom, in the community, in freedom movements for so long, right? And so I think we're at this kind of critical juncture. And what is the role that we Northeastern have to play in that, right? What is the role that Africana Studies has to play? The theme that I chose for this year for our program is Reimagining Together. And I love that theme because I always say, you know, the imagination is where all of our justice work has to begin. The imagination is where our intellectual work begins. It's where our activist work begins. It's where our art begins. So we're going to start reimagining together as we, you know, in the back of our minds, well, I'm like praying that she quickly arrives here quickly. But we're going to imagine, we're going to get into the work of imagining together. And I'm so grateful that so many of you did send in questions and filled out the surveys. and put in some general topics about what you would like to discuss. And so I'm just gonna say a few of those things now, right? So we had people that said they wanted to talk about a vision for the future. They want to discuss gender, race, and justice in Boston, workforce and housing equity, funding for education in low-income communities, how foreign ideas of Africa influence what Africa is expected to be, the future of policing in Boston, poverty, housing, so many different issues here. And I want to invite us all to just think, first of all, what does it mean for us as a university community at this moment in history? We have an incoming mayor, we have a change in government. But what does it mean for us to have an impact, right? What does it mean for us to really take on that role of experiential learning, to be committed and ethically community engaged? What does it mean and what does it look like for us to start doing that work in this moment? This is an open question. I have some of my students here from my class, and so they know I like to ask these really open-ended questions, and then we'll just pass anyone the mic. And we have a lot of folks here that love to think about these questions and that have thought about them a lot, so I invite anyone to chime in. Where are we right now? How do we reimagine together? And what is Northeastern's role in that? And please, as you speak, everyone who speaks, please introduce yourself for us. Thank you. And stand, by all means.
My name is Janey, I'm the president of the Northeastern Black Student Association. I guess for me, I'm thinking more so, Northeastern is all about experiential learning. So I'm thinking more so about how might we extend experiential learning into the Boston community. For example, I know Northeastern has like certain classes where we are required to do like community service within the course, or some community service learning project. So I'm thinking, how might we do that in terms of like, I don't know, increasing co-op opportunities within the city of Boston with nonprofits, with, I don't know, soup kitchens, something just giving back to the community. And also, I feel like as students, I'm from South Carolina, so I'm not a native of Boston. And I think what's important for most students is to learn the history of Boston, and the history of Roxbury, the history of Dorchester and Mattapan. So like, I'm thinking there should be some required piece entering Northeastern that requires students to learn some history of Boston. Whether or not it has to do with like the busing crisis here, or I don't know. And I would love to open the conversation up to other people as well. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that. Here you go, sorry.
We have a professor that's coming, a newly hired professor, Professor Cabria Baumgartner, and she's the Dean's Associate Professor of History and Social Justice, and she actually works on Black New England. And I think that there's some really interesting opportunities that will arise with Cabria being here. And when I was at Boston College, one of my colleagues did a class that was only half credit, but it was called Walking Black Boston. And I think that would work so well here at Northeastern. That's something that maybe we could do in Africana Studies.
Okay, Regine, thank you for recognizing me. I'm Uta Poiga. I'm the Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, and I just wanted to thank you for the good ideas that you already brought forward and just comment a little bit on them. I do think we are always looking for what are the right kinds of formats in order to increase the knowledge, awareness, tackle the kinds of questions that you are raising as someone who comes from South Carolina and then confronts the realities of Boston. And I think pretty quickly one has a sense that there is some larger history, but there's also some very, very specific history in this place. And I would just say that many of us really feel that more needs to be done with regard to that, and we really look forward to building with you students also in research frameworks. I do think Professor Jean-Charles undersold herself a little bit in this context, because of course she herself works so much with organizations in Boston and is actually one of the people who has literally rewritten social history here, but also works on Boston pasts in the context, for example, of Haitian migration communities and migrant communities. But I think you are really raising questions that I would just say are super important, and where we need to get together faculty, staff, and community partners in order to do more. And then at the same time be aware that not all of us have always the same amounts of time to spend on these things. I would say there are some classes that exist, like one that Professor Rabinovich has taught recently that does some of these walking tours with regard to Black Boston, but also, say, Jewish history in Boston. Again, we definitely want you to push us on the curriculum, but also want to be able to portray all of you the curriculum. I would also just say to all of you who are newer to Northeastern, Northeastern students do a lot of cooperative education in social service, in nonprofit organizations across sometimes in the university too, but I mean across the university and this region, and then of course also globally. And I would just like you to keep in mind that our co-op coordinators are always really quite happy to get additional leads as to where there might be need. And those of you who are contemplating work with organizations that do not have the wherewithal to pay for your work should then look to places like the students in the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. Because of philanthropy and some funding, we can support such efforts. So in other words, where organizations themselves cannot fund the work, we can help contribute to the work. So please, all of you students and all of you in the community who see additional opportunities, reach out to us in co-op, and we would love to continue to work with the communities on just the right kinds of supports for educational opportunities that also support the work that needs to be done in the city of Boston more broadly. So thank you for giving me this little pulpit here. Who wants the microphone next?
Hi, I'm Janey. I'm the secretary of the Northeastern Black Student Association and also one of Dr. Regine's students. I would say that in terms of Northeastern positioning itself for social justice to serve not only the BIPOC and marginalized communities around it, but also its students, is honestly things as simple as class offerings and who's teaching classes and expanding cultural departments, which we're seeing a lot of being done now, obviously, but having cultural classes consistently available, being able to take those year round, having the Caribbean literature class being taught every single year instead of every 2 or 3 years, having the East Asian Studies class taught every year instead of every 2 or 3 years, has been a large challenge for a lot of people. I'm international affairs who want to take these courses. And of course, we know professors are doing so much work and colleges are doing so much work to expand these programs. But I think having them available and letting students know about them and having them easily accessible and taught by professors who look like people from those communities is a big part of serving the community well and providing that education to people who aren't necessarily from those cultures and from marginalized communities, similar to having classes about Black Boston, which is such a rich history that I didn't really know about before I got lucky enough to do research on it on my own. So yeah, I think that's a great way to do it and get more involved in the communities around us, because a lot of people aren't aware of the history of Roxbury or the Black community in Boston, and also how much the Black community has moved out of Boston to sort of the different communities. So I think that's really important as well.
Hi, I'm Aubrielle. I'm the vice president of the Black Student Association, and I'm majoring in psychology, double minoring in African American Studies and behavioral neuroscience. And one thing that I wanted to definitely address in terms of our future and envisioning what that looks like at Northeastern is talking about and being open about the tension of being a Black student at a university that takes so much from the original Black community that is here. So there's definitely a tension that I feel like being a student at Northeastern, knowing that entering whatever field I go into and with my career, I'm going to be redefining that field and increasing diversity, but I'm also taking from the community in which my university exists, unfairly often too. And so I think that I would personally like to see a lot of agency from non-Black faculty and administrators in terms of remedying how much we take in terms of literal space just in the city of Boston, but then also how we contribute to gentrification, what we are doing to the families and the communities that existed here before us. So seeing a lot more agency from the university on that part, I think would be something that would be beneficial. And it's often the burden of the people who feel the tension to come up with these solutions. So that's why having more impact from, or having more influence from non-Black or non-POC faculty in terms of remedying some of these things is really important.
Thank you, Abrielle. That's so important.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Emilia. I'm a graduate student in the Urban Informatics program. So I think a lot about, the uses of data and how we can build infrastructure to also kind of support these histories, to tell these stories, to make sure that these voices are being heard. But I also kind of wanted to go back to the sort of question surrounding community engagement. I feel like that word gets thrown around a lot in terms of grants or companies that are trying to do something that they believe would be good for these communities without really thinking of that vision all the way through and the real impact of how the service that they offer is really only accessible to people with technology, and that comes with its own kind of issues. So I feel like it's really important as an institution to think really critically and to come up with real metrics for what that actually looks like. What is the goal? What is the vision? How can we make sure that we're reinforcing policies with new information that we've gathered from the effectiveness of these, say, partnerships or projects or programs or whichever. I also think that there's a lot of opportunity to use imagination in this as well. I think that's such a salient point. It's going to be so critical in the coming decades when we imagine a world in which we're trying to adapt to climate change, imagining what abolishing the carceral state would look like. These are things that really, really require us to think outside of the box, and I think that in a very real way we can integrate the institution that's kind of housing all of these great researchers, both in terms of quantitative data and in terms of history, sociology, psychology. And there's a really important kind of opportunity to make the city a living museum. I think neighborhoods as a living museum, integrating artists, integrating designers and people from this area into these more technical solutions that we're all going to have to work together on.
I love that.
Hi, Dr. John Calls. I'm a first year at the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs. I'm new to Boston and I'm from New York City. Go Yankees! I wanted to point to something that Dr. Richards was talking about at the open classroom the other day, which was that it's the first time in Northeastern's history that I think the entire Black population is about 10%. And later that day, I met a young lady who told me that Northeastern doesn't offer much opportunities to Black students who are actually from Boston. And so that got me thinking, is Northeastern underutilizing or not tapping into these communities enough? Or are students from these underserved communities who happen to be Black just not qualified to get into Northeastern? And so if that was any of the case, I think it was, what are some of the programs or policies can Northeastern implement, such as building bridges between high schools where there are predominantly students of color or Black students who are underserved, and between them and itself, to ensure that by the time that students are graduating from high school, they're prepared to apply to Northeastern and getting to here. And when they get into Northeastern, what kind of resources can Northeastern offer them to ensure that they stay? because I grew up in the Bronx, and it wasn't up until my senior year of college that of high school, that I even started thinking about high school, about college. My apologies, but yeah. So I think Northeastern has the resources and the capacity. Clearly, students who are willing to work with the community. Right now, I know that the African American Institute has a mentorship program. So it's something like extending that mentorship program to the high schools in the surrounding areas, or Africana Studies tapping into the high school counselors and telling them, we have students who can help your high schoolers with their college applications, or tell them about what Northeastern has to offer and how they can take advantage of this institution. Thank you.
There are a couple of programs that exist that are similar to that, and so I think the dean is going to talk about that, maybe.
You know, there's of course multiple deans, but thank you. And I think you are right. There is really more that we as a community need to think about doing constructively with all the communities that surround us in Boston and around all the campuses that Northeastern has. I just want to point out a couple of things, and Regine, you might have other examples, but for example, the English writing program works with 826 Boston, which is has a writing center, and then we are the prime university partner, but that's basically a writing program that works with high schools all throughout the city. Northeastern, as a result, always hosts, for example, an essay writing boot camp in the fall. I just want you to think, as coming more recently from New York, that Northeastern is doing something. Foundation Year is another very important program that we have that is underknown, I think, at our campus. But that doesn't mean that your challenge isn't right, that we in fact need to think more about how to get these interactions to a better place, how to get yet more resources into empowering the communities that surround us. But there are definitely multiple things, like Regine Jean-Charles is saying, that we can build on, and you know, lots of energy that people around campus have put into those kinds of things.
We do have a program for high school students, right?
We have also the Summer Bridge program for students who are coming new, which Richard Harris led. Regine and others worked together, and you know, some of you were probably peer mentors in that program. And again, a shout out to all of you students who also really are working with John O'Brien or with such peer programs more generally in order to making this a more welcoming place for broader members of multiple communities, basically. But again, there are foundations to build on, so thank you. To whom do I?
And then the question, I think, is always, how do we scale certain initiatives up, right? So that, because, you know, my goal is always to, you know, this is where I become very, like, nobody's free until everybody's free. Like, how do we free the largest possible number of people, right? So it's like, how do you scale up the things that are already happening as well? I think, Rebecca, did you want to say something? Oh, please go ahead.
I'm not a student.
You can still
I
talk.
just want to echo, so my name's Dan, I'm a postdoc in the writing program, and I totally feel you. So I come from a community college teaching background in Roxbury Community College. I don't know what kind of partnerships we have at Northeastern with them, but it speaks to the idea of taking, you know, space from that community, and not to say let's take it there and give somewhere else, but I think that those are, you know, connections that I see. I also come from a teaching college, and I worked at UMass Boston, so some various ways that institutes can definitely tap into the education systems of their communities. I know I don't think we have an undergraduate education program here, is that correct?
That's correct. There's certification options and so on,
but that's kind of maybe through co-ops or other, you know, student organizations.
So go into co-ops in schools.
And that's all, you know, that's all ways to say. I'll plug the writing program too. They have new student learning objectives or outcomes that are looking at critical perspectives and working with intersectional identities, and that's really important. Yeah.
My friends, don't forget when you speak to put the mic close to your mouth, because we have friends online that can't hear us.
Yes, thank you so much. And actually, Dean Porger, would you mind repeating into the mic what you just mentioned in person?
I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm going to try and do better. What I had mentioned was the 826 writing program partnerships. That is a community writing program where our students regularly work with high schools in Boston. It's also a program that works with other universities. I also wanted to stress that at the same time, both of you who have spoken and have really challenged the university to do more, that seems right. And then, of course, you heard her loud and clear. I would just want to agree with what Professor Jean-Charles said, that the question of how do we build on those good efforts and how do we scale them responsibly so that they don't lose the energy and what's good about them in the process of being scaled. But those are challenges that we need to work on together. And then I was thanking all the students who are peer mentors as well. So just want to really give a shout out to all of you for the mentoring that you are doing of one another. Thank you, Mika.
Thank you, Mika. Hello, everybody. I'm Rebecca Ricci. I'm the founder and director of the Social Impact Lab, which is academically affiliated with the Human Services Program and located in the Policy School. I will start by thanking Dr. O'Brien for holding this space so amazingly well all the time. After all he's been through, he is always there. And I want to thank Dr. Jean-Charles for bringing such vibrancy and energy into our space. Thank you. And I also want to shout out to the students who over the last year and a half have demonstrated what it means to be in praxis and to be in relationship as part of your commitment to racial and social justice. Because following up on what you said, Regine, there can't be social change and social justice without praxis. And so that means we have to live what we talk. And I just want to say how inspired I am by seeing our students and student activists doing that all the time. And I never, ever, ever want you to forget that you are our role models. And it is so emotionally draining on so many of you to do what you've done in the last year and a half. And I just want to celebrate that and thank you for that. And I think it's especially important that we make this connection to praxis when we talk about community engagement. When you're an anchor institution like Northeastern is, community engagement is your default state of being. It's not just something that you get to choose to do and then say, we're going to do this benevolent work. It is how you are in community all the time. And so praxis for us means understanding what that power and position means to the people of Boston, as so many of you have said. And it begins in the classroom when we're talking about issues and we're talking about communities that may be adjacent to the lived experience of our students. And so it begins with anti-racist and anti-oppressive pedagogy in the classroom. And then when we consciously and deliberately go into community, well, then the stakes are even higher, because then we're inserting ourselves into other people's lives with the intention to help or affect change. And that's really a loaded decision to make. So one of the commitments that we're making in the Social Impact Lab to our students and to the communities that you are currently engaged in and will be engaged in for the rest of your lives is to be thinking about what principles of ethical community engaged teaching and research look like. And how do we not just say the words, but hold ourselves accountable, because there's also no social justice without accountability. There are no real relationships without accountability. So I would just like to invite you, if you'd like to be part of thinking about what these principles can be, at least from the Social Impact Lab, like what we're trying to aspire to, I would invite you to be part of workshopping those principles with us and thinking about what accountability looks like, and perhaps add to your voices something that you can use as you're thinking about being in community with each other, with your faculty and administrators in the communities you want to work in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Savita. I'm a fourth-year English major, and I work with Africana Studies. And I grew up in Boston. I went to Boston Public Schools, and I think a problem in BPS is that students are not taught about Black history or even the history of the communities that we're in. So we kind of grow up not knowing like how our legacies exist in this space, and I think that's really problematic. And I also think oftentimes like high school students are unaware of what can be taught in college and kind of like the range of things that can be taught. And I think as an institution, we need to be really mindful of what community engagement is and what that looks like, and the cultural wealth communities of color have. And instead of telling communities of color like what they need, we should listen and see how we can best assist them.
I agree with you, Savita. Some of the service learning I did, teaching that I did when I was at Boston College, I would always tell my students, your job is not to go in there, because they would work with nonprofits that were based in Boston and in Cambridge. They work with Black Lives Matter Boston, they work with the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, they worked with the Haitian Women's Association in Boston, in Mattapan, and I would say, your job is not to go in there and tell them what they need to solve their problems, right? Your job is to do whatever it is they ask you to do, even if it's cleaning the toilets. And I really do believe that you have to build the relationships in order to get anything done, and that foundation is so essential. Jania, I saw your hand up, yes.
I just wanted
Don't forget to put the mic.
Is this good? Sort of add to, I forgot your name, but you're a graduate student here, the points that you made about how important it is to have outreach to Black communities in Boston, and even just a variety of Black students. And this is a conversation we have frequently in NBSA, but even within the Black students here, how many Black students at Northeastern are Black Americans? How many are immigrants? How many are first gen? Those kind of things matter, especially when you have such a prominent Black community right next to Northeastern. And I've always heard about, obviously there's a lot of engagement that Northeastern is doing, but then as someone who's been in NBSA for 2 years, I have yet to meet a student from Roxbury. And so even though those programs are there and those communities are obviously present on campus, where are they sometimes? Not that they're invisible, but that these things can be increased, and having also platforms within Northeastern, like you said, that support the Black students here, and that there's a clear route to voicing concerns or thoughts or ideas to the university is important as well. I believe that there's a lot of knowledge on this campus, and students obviously know what they would like and what they need from their colleges, from their advisors, from their professors. But a lot of times we don't know where to go to say, oh, I've heard of this expansion program. Can you tell me like how it works, or where these students are, how engagement are, and the numbers?
Sorry, Jania.
No problem.
Go on, Jania, finish. Hello, welcome. Jania, were you done?
Yes.
Sorry about that, Jania. I just want to say, Dr. Richard O'Brien, I told you so. At the beginning of this, when we heard what happened, there was a question of like, is she actually going to make it? And I said, I have faith. I believe that she's going to make it. So I'm glad that you're here, Mayor Janey. I activated my faith, and here you are. So I'm going to read the mayor's bio. Mayor Kim Michelle Janey has been at the center of Boston's history, the bad and the good. At 11 years old, Kim Janey was on the front lines of the battle to desegregate the city's schools, facing rocks and racial slurs during Boston's tumultuous busing era in the 1970s. 45 years later, she made history when she was sworn in as Boston's first woman and first Black mayor, successfully leading the city through a multitude of unprecedented challenges, including the COVID-19 global pandemic. Mayor Janey began her tenure with a citywide agenda of recovery, reopening, and renewal to address systemic inequities exposed and exacerbated by the pandemic. Mayor Janey successfully reopened Boston's economy and its public schools by centering equity and prioritizing health and wellness. She curbed displacement with her housing agenda, and her safety plan led to significant reduction in the city's homicides. Under Mayor Janey's leadership, Boston became one of the most vaccinated big cities in America. Prior to becoming mayor, Kim Janey made history in 2017 when she was elected to the Boston City Council as the first woman to represent District 7. In 2020, she was elected by her peers to serve as president of the most diverse city council in Boston's history. Devoting her life to public service, Mayor Janey has 25 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. In her role at Massachusetts Advocates for Children, she championed systemic policy reforms to increase equity, excellence, access, and opportunity in Boston public schools. Prior to that, Mayor Janey worked as a community organizer, advocating for affordable, quality childcare. Mayor Janey has been recognized for her years of service with a number of awards, including the Boston NAACP Difference Maker Award in 2015 and the coveted Sapphire Award in 2017. In 2021, Mayor Janey was named one of Boston's most impactful Black women and listed in Boston Magazine's 100 Most Influential Bostonians. A proud fourth-generation Roxbury resident, Mayor Janey comes from a long line of educators, entrepreneurs, artists, and advocates. And Mayor Janey, before you got here, Richard O'Brien spoke really beautifully about your father, Cliff Janey, who was instrumental in the founding of this very institute in which we stand right now. Mayor Janey was raised with the values that guide her to this day: the importance of education, the power of community organizing, and the fundamental principles of equity and justice. Thank you so much for being with us today. We know it's been a whirlwind of a day, and we so appreciate you being here. So if everyone could please just put their hands together and welcome our Mayor, Kim Janey.
Thank you so much, Regine. It is so good to be here. I want to open by thanking John Tobin. I want to thank Richard O'Brien. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I certainly apologize for my tardiness. I was out busy being the mayor. So unfortunately, we had a couple of incidents that needed my attention. But I am grateful for the opportunity of being here with you this evening. You know, I've had an amazing time the last 8 months as mayor of Boston, leading our city through unprecedented challenges and crises. There have been a number. The one that comes to mind for most folks is COVID-19. And we know that COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted so many folks in our community, particularly poor communities of color. And we also know that COVID exposed and exacerbated what was there underneath the surface, which are systemic inequities that have been in the making for years, decades, and centuries. And for me, as mayor of Boston, I saw overarching priorities, two in fact. One, to comfort our city through a time of crisis and uncertainty, and making sure that we were addressing and responding to the global pandemic with the life-saving vaccine, and doing so in an equitable way, as well as addressing those inequities that were here all along, which meant that we had to do everything with a racial justice and racial equity lens to lead our city through and make sure, as my mother taught me, and I'm sure your mother has taught you, to leave this place better than how you found it. And we still have a lot of work to do, but I am very proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish together. And I want to shout out some special folks I see in the audience. My former Chief of Policy and Planning is with us, Mary Churchill. We can give her a round of applause. She is also in academia over at BU, proud Roxbury resident, and also joined by the Deputy of Policy and Planning, Lindsay Butler. Dr. Lindsay Butler, thank you for joining us. You know, we were able to do a lot in 8 months. Some folks have said we've done more in 8 months than a duly elected mayor has done in 4 years, and maybe that was the nature of what was all coming at us in terms of facing our city and really having to respond, whether that was housing and keeping people in their homes. That meant in my very first week as mayor of Boston, invested $50 million in rental relief. That same week, we invested in a vaccine equity grant, making sure that we were getting the life-saving vaccine out in an equitable way, invested $1.5 million initially, and then another $1.5 million when we reopened the city, bringing that total to $3 million. And proud to say that the work that we have done here in the city of Boston has led us to being one of the most vaccinated big cities in America. We continue to do the work. We can clap for that. Thank you. Sorry. We continue to do this work focused on equity because we know that there are still gaps. There are gaps as we roll out the booster. We expect to see gaps as we continue to do the work to vaccinate our children, 5 to 11, and we want to close these gaps. And we've done important work reaching out to the Latino community, to the Black community, and we've seen increases, but those gaps still persist. And so there is still a lot of work to do there. We know that housing there was a housing crisis long before COVID. We did that initial investment, but we went beyond rental relief to support tenants and landlords. We wanted to make sure that we were investing in our future, that we were creating opportunities for home ownership, that we were in fact, doing the work to begin to close the enormous wealth gap here in the city of Boston. And so we also quadrupled the down payment assistance, taking that from $10,000 to $40,000 for those who are looking to buy their first home in the city of Boston. We invested in a foreclosure prevention fund to keep people in their homes. When the eviction moratorium expired at the federal level, we stepped in and put one in place here to, again, protect folks and keep them in their homes. We can clap for that, whoever's snapping. We also did important work around our climate, getting our children back in schools safely, supporting small businesses. So much work, but so much work remains. We've done a lot. We've built a firm foundation for the next administration, and I certainly want to congratulate Mayor-elect Wu, and we've been working closely on the transition. I know folks are probably wondering, though, how is it that you came to this? So I will say a little bit, and then I'm obviously not using this because I've got to shorten my remarks because I'm so late, so we can get into the Q&A. I think it's really important that we engage, and I want to respond to questions that may be on your mind. As was mentioned in the bio, I come from a long line of educators. My parents were teachers. My sister currently teaches in Boston Public Schools. I have aunts and cousins who taught. And one of the things that my dad taught me growing up, as he told so many great stories, was his time here at Northeastern. And so he graduated, his undergraduate work was here at Northeastern University. And one of the stories that he loved to tell was the time that they took over the president's office, that the students took over the president's office. They had their demandments, that they called them. And they wanted more, they wanted to see more students that looked like them. They wanted to see a Black Studies program. They wanted a place that was safe for students to gather. They pushed for a number of things, and all of their work, their organizing work, led to the creation of the African American Institute here at Northeastern. And I am really proud of that legacy and carried that work forward in my own career as a child advocate, as someone who got involved in community organizing 30 years ago, very much because my daughter, I was a young single mom, and I wanted to make sure that I was creating the best opportunity for her. And it was through that organizing experience and that advocacy that led me to a career in education policy, again, trying to create a better path for young people here in Boston, using my daughter as kind of that inspiration to do more for all children. And that led me to run for Boston City Council, where I became the first woman elected to represent District 7, became the council president, and then became mayor of Boston, where we continue to, even in this last week, deal with a multitude of crises. And so proud of the work that we've done in the mayor's office to bring people in, to make sure that we were opening up our doors, bringing people in who have felt left out of power, who felt like the only reason to go to City Hall was to pay a parking ticket. We wanted to make sure that we were opening up the halls of power and bringing people in who didn't always have that access. We also knew, though, through the devastation and the isolation of COVID-19, that it was important that we be intentional, not just in the racial equity work, but that we be intentional in creating space for joy. And so we launched a joy agenda. And I will end on this joy agenda, and I think folks here will understand the importance of joy, particularly as it is rooted in African American culture, and the need to find that joy, to tap into that joy, not happiness, which is fleeting, but joy that comes from deep within. Knowing that even when my ancestors were enslaved and were, doing the hard work of building this nation with little reward, and as difficult as that experience was, that folks found and made time for joy, whether it was through song, whether it was through their faith, whether it was through food and convening. And it is so important that we make space for joy, particularly when things are hard, when they're tough, when it seems impossible, when it seems everything is stacked against us, that the whole world may be burning all around us, because that joy is so critically important to restoring what will keep us going in this fight. It is important in terms of, yes, we can clap, we can snap for that. It is so important to how we rebuild and reconnect with each other after being isolated and stuck in Zoom boxes for a very long time. And so we wanted to create that space where we could bring the residents of Boston back together in a joyful way. We did salsa on the plaza. We did coffee hours, and coffee hours are not new. Mayors have been doing coffee hours for a long time, but we put our own spin on it, and we incorporated the arts. We had DJs, we had dance performances, we had spoken word at our coffee hours, and we had iced coffee for the first time. I'm not sure why that was so groundbreaking, but it took a woman mayor, I think, to bring iced coffee in during the summer when it's hot, instead of hot coffee. But we did movie nights. We did all of these different things. We had a house party, if people like house music. Who likes house music here? All right. We did an old school R&B party. We did a bunch of things that we really just wanted to bring people together. And why? Because joy is important. Why? Because we've got a lot more work to do, and it is so important that we took the time to rejuvenate, to make sure that we were able to kind of get up again, no matter how difficult it is, to continue on with that fight. And so I am truly grateful for the opportunity to serve and lead our city through very challenging times. And I'm also super proud that as the first woman mayor and the first black mayor of our city, that I get to hand the baton over to another woman mayor, and I get to see my granddaughter, who is 7 years old, and all little girls who look like her, see themselves reflected in leadership in City Hall. And I want to emphasize in City Hall because we see women in leadership every single day in our households. I will say it again. We see women in leadership every single day in our households, but it is not recognized, it is not often valued. And so it is great to see more and more women running for office, more and more women of color as Boston's mayor, I was part of a sisterhood of black women mayors all across our nation who are leading major cities like Chicago, like Washington, D.C., like San Francisco, like Atlanta. And it is great to see women step up. And I'm certainly hopeful that as you spend time here at Northeastern, that the students here will go on to do great things and continue to lead our communities, our Commonwealth, and our country. And so I'm just grateful for playing a small part in Boston's proud history here. So thank you so much. Thank you again for the opportunity. Looking forward to chatting.
Thank you so much for that. That was really wonderful. Oh, there's so many things I want to ask you now, of course. So first, I want to give you your flowers.
Oh.
Thank you. This is a token of appreciation and thanks.
I appreciate it. I do indeed. Thank you.
You have, we want to thank you also just for your service. You ended on that beautiful note of, your 7-year-old granddaughter being able to see women do this. I also have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old daughters, but I also have sons who are teenagers, and it's so important for all of the children, right, to be able to see this. So I appreciate it so much. And we just want to thank you from the Northeastern family, because you are family here at Northeastern. And then we want to know how you're doing. I mean, I think, you came here in a whirlwind this afternoon, and we really do hope that you are going to take time for joy and rest and restoration and self-care after this, these long 8 months. And so just a check-in, how are you?
I am good. It has been a very difficult week. We've had a number of incidents and challenges that just underscore the importance of the work and making sure that we continue to find places where we can come together and build with each other, because there is so much trauma out there, and it's unresolved trauma, it's unaddressed trauma, and it is leading to just a number of violent incidents in our community. And so we want to make sure that we are doing that work to address trauma as well as create that space for joy. But I am doing okay, and I'm going to do exactly what you suggested, which is take some time for rest, for reflection, for writing, for restoration, all of that. Yes.
I appreciate that you talk about trauma and you talk about joy. I always tell my students that most of these things that we deal with in life and that we think about are always both and, right? And I'm struck by this idea of the joy agenda. It made me think of Alice Walker's Possessing the Secret of Joy, in which, at the end of the book, they say the joy is in the resistance, but also the resistance is in the joy, right? Yes. So that's what you're talking about, being fortified by that joy. And so,
it's part of self-care.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that joy agenda to Boston. So recently, the New York Times published an article a few days ago about the 8 black women mayors in the United States that you also referenced. And we wanted to know, because everyone always says, first black and first woman mayor, what was it like for you to be part of that unique community, that sorority of mayors?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that it was just completely surreal. I had pinch me moments for the first, probably couple of months. I grew up here in Boston, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s. So, and I love my city, but I remember what my city was like, and I did not think in a million years that I would live to see a black mayor, even though we had already had a black governor, we had already had a black president. It just seemed so out of reach for Boston. And then that we'd have a black mayor, and then it'd be me.
And it would be you.
What? What's going on here? And then to lead at a time where we're dealing with all of these unprecedented challenges, but that there is this sisterhood out there of women who, when there is something happening in one of our cities where you can kind of check in and say, hey, how are you dealing with X, Y, and Z? Or just encouragement, you know, being able to connect with women all over the country to offer encouragement when things are tough. It is great. I am super proud to see what I've always seen and known for, you know, quite some time because of the examples that I've had in my life and the footsteps that I walk in some ways, and other ways blazing kind of a trail, because there has never been here in Boston, where other cities have had multiple black mayors by now. Boston's still just now catching up to folks, so.
So before you got here, we were having a discussion about community engagement. We were talking about, you know, Northeastern's role in the city of Boston. We have we have the president of our Black Students Association here and some board members that are here. Hey. Some of my students in my gender and Black world literature class, Africana Studies minors who are here participating. And I know that, you know, obviously you understand the importance of that activism as you talked about your dad, but I actually learned from one of my mentors, who's Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin, that she said she knew you when you were a baby organizer. She told me about the work that you did with the Black Student Leadership Network. And I wanted to know about your experience as a college student organizer, and what advice do you have for our college students here at Northeastern, specifically in the city of Boston? What advice do you have for student activists who care about social justice, who care about racial justice, who are taking an intersectional approach to justice in our city?
Yep, keep going. So my advice is to do it, to do the work. I think it is so important, and I'm grateful to Farah. And all of those who train. You're right, I was a baby organizer. It was the early 1990s, 1992, in fact. My daughter was 10 years old. I'm in my 20s. I'm attending a community college, and a professor. We were hungry for Black studies. So I grew up in Boston, 70s and 80s, never kind of learned about my own history throughout that time. I go to school, and now there's an opportunity, only because this one professor, she's an adjunct professor, Farah knows her, Lisa Sullivan, who is, she was my mentor, and she's now deceased. Anyway, everybody, there was lines out the door trying to get into her class. And we were all so hungry for it, I loved it. But she introduced me to a whole new world. One, it was go to this conference at Yale. Then it was, okay, well, we've got this program, the Black Student Leadership Network. It was the inaugural class. We're gonna train college students from all over the country, and then you guys are gonna go organize freedom schools. And we're doing this because Marian Wright Edelman, and I know you all know who Marian Wright Edelman is. She was active in SNCC, the founder of the Children's Defense Fund, and served as its leader for the first 50 years. They're a little more than 50 years old now. She had determined in 1990 that Black children were facing the worst crisis since slavery. And so she convened and organized Black leadership all across the country. Dorothy Height, Coretta Scott King, like all of these big names. And in their wisdom, they understood the power of young people because they were all active back in their youth. And so they then said, we need to organize young folks. And so we formed the Black Student Leadership Network. And that first summer, 1992, at Shaw University, it was the Ella Baker Child Policy Training Institute. They trained us in direct action organizing. They trained us in child advocacy and civil rights movement history, and then sent us out on our way. And so the advice I have is to do it. Young people have always been at the forefront of every single movement. Black women have always been at the forefront of every single movement. So go ahead and do it. Do it.
I love that. Somebody asked me that question. I had a student ask me recently, what is your advice for what should we do? And I was like, you all are doing it. I think they're even more kind of savvy than we were. They're incredible. That's what I love about working with college students. Okay, so what do you see as your legacy as the mayor of Boston? How do you want the history books to write about Mayor Kim Janey?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. And I'm not sure it's one for me to answer, but I certainly would love for the history to tell the truth about what we've did in terms of moving our city forward, in terms of lifting up those who were left behind, in terms of having a laser-like focus on racial equity and racial justice work, making sure that we were getting the life-saving vaccine into people's arms and doing it in an equitable way, trying to do everything we can to tackle the racial wealth gap in Boston and create opportunity for those who have been left out of home ownership, particularly in the Black community, the Latino community, making sure that we continue to focus on our kids and ensuring every opportunity for success and getting them not just back in the classrooms, but how do we make up for a year plus, given that this is of remote learning and this is the third school year impacted by COVID-19. So many little things from, issuing library cards to every student, launching a program to deal with the fact that so many folks have drowned, not just this summer, but every summer, and they often look like me. And so making sure that we're doing more to teach Black children in particular how to swim, and investing in building up lifeguards and folks who can do that work. So many little things that, never get picked up. Just the kind of big controversies get picked up. But I just hope that I hope that the people of Boston truly just appreciate all that we've tried to do, because everything that we've done that keeping people in mind.
Thank you for that. The Haitian proverb comes to mind. Piti piti oiseau fait nichely. Little by little, the bird makes its nest. This is the last question because we don't have much time. So our theme is Reimagining Together. That's our theme for the year in the Africana Studies Program, which I direct. And so this theme is chosen based on this idea that the imagination is the beginning of all of our work, right? So our justice work. Marion Wright Edelman had to imagine what was needed, right, to create that program, to create the Freedom Schools. So what would it look like for you when you think about that idea of reimagining the city of Boston? What are the dreams that you have for the city of Boston?
I see a vibrant city that is full of art and music and outdoor spaces that are activated, green spaces. I see, people of color, Black people in particular, everywhere. There was an article in the Globe, I guess last week, that talked about how segregated we are. Like, we don't, we hear that a lot. And they tracked cell phone data. It's not just segregated in terms of where we live, but in what we do and where we go. And just, there are so many amazing things here in the city of Boston, our waterfront, all these different places and spaces, cultural institutions, and would love to see a city where little girls who grew up like me see this as theirs. They see all of this as theirs and not, just their block. I see a place where we have dealt with and are not afraid to confront our own history around racism, and that we're willing to have the tough conversations and create more opportunities for those who have been left out of power, left out of opportunity to build wealth, that we are, tackling poverty, that we are addressing trauma, and that there's just more, I'm going to end on joy. Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming to our second event in Reimagining Together series in the Africana Studies Program. We appreciate you joining us in conversation with Mayor Kim Janey. We wanted to give a special thanks to Mayor Kim Janey for taking the time to come here and have a meaningful discussion with all of us, despite all that's happened today. as well as Dr. Richard O'Brien and the Institute for allowing us to hold this event in this space along with all our co-sponsors. The Africana Studies Programs has more events coming up in the spring as part of the Reimagining Together series. Our final speaker for this semester will be a virtual conversation with author Nana Nkwete on December 8th. Stay tuned for more details, and please keep an eye on our social media, newsletter, and website for updates. Additionally, spring classes are now online, so make sure you register for Africana Studies classes next week. There are flyers at the front. In this moment, we will invite you in-person attendees to the back of the room for a photo opportunity with Mayor Kim Janey. Please line up on my left-hand side of the room where Mika will be standing to guide you. The mayor does have to depart shortly, so we may not get to everyone, but we hope that we will. Again, thank you for coming, and please stay in your seats while we transition to this photo opportunity. And now line up to the side. And thank you for coming. We really appreciate it.
This is unscripted. But as we talked about, Mayor Janey and my dad meant so much to this city, but also to Northeastern. And so I just wanted to make sure that I got an opportunity to present her with a jacket for the John Deere Bryan African American Institute that her dad was so instrumental in making happen. And so thank you, Mayor Janey. Congratulations and wonderful job. Yep. And if it doesn't fit, we'll get you another one. But thank you for all that you've done for our city. All right.